So, welcome to the Detour podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Rupert Guinness. He's a senior sports writer, previously with Fairfax and News Limited, and a best-selling author of 15 books. He's a cycling tragic, one of the most respected journalists in the world of cycling, and also a very good mate of mine. G'day, Rup.
G'day, Effie. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, mate, we couldn't have a show on cycling without having you involved. But before we go into all things cycling and Hawaiian shirts, glad to see you wearing yours. I talked about our partners, who a couple of them happen to be partners of yours as well, so it works in well. So, firstly, Bike Exchange. So, for anyone out there who's looking for a bike, and in this current world we're in, bike sales have gone ballistic. Bike shops, you're struggling to get one in a bike shop, so you've got to go to Bike Exchange. And if you're looking for a bike and don't know where to start, then go to the Bike Exchange concierge. The Bike Exchange team is on hand to answer any of your questions. So, and I know that they partnered you in your recent VRAAM challenge, Rup.
Yeah, they certainly did, Effie. Great partners to come on board, and we're pretty excited about the future as well, because no one project stops with one project. There's always ideas that come out of it, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, an Australian idea. There's now around the world in 8 countries, so a fantastic partner. Also, Let's Go Motorhome. So I noticed you had them involved, even though you weren't going anywhere. You had the motorhome parked in Sydney. Tell us about that.
Yeah. During VRAAM, the virtual race across America, we had a Let's Go Motorhome. The Conquest Royale was the model, and it was positioned behind me for the 12 days of VRAAM. And the idea, we wanted to first set up a scenario that we were going somewhere, even though we weren't. After 12 days, we were still parked at the G Brothers Mercedes garage in Mona Vale in Sydney. And but the idea was to have that, and obviously it was very useful. And I had my very short naps. I could go into my motorhome or into the Let's Go Motorhome and get quite comfortable, to tell you the truth, with a nice little double bed at the back.
So John and Andrew in Let's Go were telling me that's the least fuel that's ever been used for 2 weeks of a hire of the Let's Go Motorhome. But they're great for the perfect family escape, and amazingly, they're actually really going gangbusters at the moment. I thought with all the overseas travellers who normally hire the Let's Go Motorhomes, they'd be quiet. They would be very quiet, but they've been going really well. I think they've slowed down a little bit in Melbourne at the moment. Melbourne becoming the Mexico of Australia.
Well, I can tell you that I went past I was doing a recovery ride on the weekend. I went past the Let's Go Motorhomes base in Botany in Sydney, and it was almost empty. So obviously those motorhomes are going somewhere. I like to think it was because of the push that we gave it with VRAAM, but I think there's a few other elements in the game there.
I think so, of course. And our other great partner, Alexis of Blackburn. So if anyone's after a new car, then Lexus of Blackburn is the place to go. And they're a great partner in cycling. They're sponsors of the Sun Tour and the Bay Crits and their national championships. It's been fantastic. And you met the Moore family a couple of years ago when they came on the Tour de France for the final week. I remember we had that infamous the TGV trip from right down the bottom of France up to Paris, and it's called the very fast train. Well, it was a very slow train that day. Remember that one, mate?
Oh, I'll never forget it. I mean, I guess that experience making the transfer back to Paris reminded me of the good old days of the adventure that the Tour de France can be. And sometimes those adventures get lost these days, but it only takes one little experience like that where we came to a stop, and because the TGV we had no catering, we suddenly realised we had a 5-hour trip with no food, no drinks, on the night before the Tour de France finishing. We stopped somewhere, and nobody knew how long we were going to stop for, not even the train conductor. They just said, "Peut-être en 20 minutes," and then suddenly we all ran out and spread across the station area, beers, wine, burgers, chips, the whole lot. I think we overstocked, didn't we?
I remember Andrew, Sarah, and young Bethany from the Lexus family, and we got all the supplies back for them. But it was, and then we sat there for another half an hour, so we didn't have to run at all. But anyway, that's the way.
Well, I remember that sense of fear that we had all our bags on the train, and she was the only one with about 20 bags. And I remember standing with Sammy Edmund outside the kebab shop ordering 12 kebabs, and the guy suddenly thought it was a piece of art. He was taking so long to get the kebab going.
Anyway, we got there. So it's good to see you're wearing your Hawaiian shirt, as you've become quite famous for. So tell us, how did that start, the Hawaiian shirt?
Well, like most things, there was no strategy behind it. It was really back in the day before the tour started being covered by television, in Australia especially. I mean, not covered by television, but in Australia, I mean. And it was going back in probably about 1989 and 1990. I had a couple of Hawaiian shirts, and firstly, they're just comfortable, they're light, easy to wash. And in the tour, you just wear clothes over and over. You don't have to take a whole wardrobe. And then they became highly visible. It actually was a practical use, I quickly figured, because one, the cars, whoever I was traveling with in the car, obviously at the stage start and finish, you needed to be able to find people and they could see me. And secondly, there was actually a practical use in the old media scrums. I remember Stewie O'Grady once saying how this was the days where the big scrums were there and none of this mixed zone stuff. And I managed to get my arm through with a tape recorder, and through a funnel, through this phalanx of humanity in front of me, I managed to get a question through. And he heard the voice, he recognised it, and he saw the sleeve of my Hawaiian shirt and figured that was me. So there was a practical use to
it. So let's move on to the current day route. Now, you've just had a hectic couple of weeks. We've just been touching on the VRAAM. So the race across America is a huge race. So tell us about VRAAM and how that all came about.
Well, I was training for Race Across America, which was in its 39th year this year. So it got cancelled because of COVID, like so many other events. And very quickly, my crew chief, Anthony Gordon, who's also a videographer, he came up with this idea. He likes to go walking. And when he goes for a walk, I get worried because he comes back with ideas. Anyway, he came back and he said, why don't we do it virtually? I originally scoffed at the whole idea and just brushed it off like that. What I didn't know at the time, he'd spoken to a couple of my support crew about whether they thought I could physically do it and psychologically if I'd be up for it. Anyway, as what happens, that night I started pondering over it, over a couple of glasses of rosé, and then little did I know how firmly he had planted the idea in my mind. Called him back the next day and said, hey, that's not a bad idea. And so we took it up from there, and suddenly over the next 7 weeks, basically it went from being an alternative platform for me to use my VRAAM preparation and also to try and use it as a platform to create awareness for mental health, into something that morphed into an event which had over 200 competitors in 3 categories for 30 countries, and we were all linked by a dot watching system, and the overriding cause was for mental health. And suddenly this, over 7 weeks, we had a 12-day event which for VRAAM, virtual RAM, the distance was going to be 4,500 kilometres, although the official distance was shortened later when they realised it was 30% harder than it was meant to be, because this is all new. This is all part of the excitement of something new and different. Nobody knew how it would work or not. And at the end of the day, it was a really hugely successful event, I believe, and I think it generated some positivity at a time of, as we're all going through now around the world, a lot of challenges. And it generated positivity, gave me a platform to champion mental health with awareness, and also for me to get a good result on the board in preparation for RAM for next year. I was very happy with 8th place, and so the road continues.
So we go back a long way, Rup, and I first remember bumping into you on the Tour de France. I think it was 1991, and you were such a keen cyclist back then. You'd been, touched on a few other sports, triathlon and rowing and stuff, but you've really grabbed the cycling bug over the last few years. So you did the Indian Pacific Wheel Races, they call it the Indy Pack, a few years back. Tell us how that came about.
I became enchanted with the story of the Overlander riders, the riders in the late 1890s or early 1890s who were these intrepid pioneers who just sort of set off from one distant place like Perth into the then unknown Australia, of interior Australia. They just followed camel pads and they rode by day as the sun rose, as the sun set. They didn't know what was out there, and they did it for many reasons. And their sort of expeditionary prowess, so to speak, very much had a role in the patchwork of road networks in Australia now, I believe. And I was writing about the Overlanders in a book called Power of the Pedal, Story of Australian Cycling, that came out in 2018. And the second chapter was about the Overlanders. And when I finished writing, sent that manuscript in, I thought, wow, you could write a whole book on the Overlanders. Lo and behold, after that, I saw this ad for the Indy Pacific Wheel Race, which said, is there the Overland in you? So I immediately thought, well, the stars are aligned. I can rediscover the story of the Overlanders by doing the Indy Pacific Wheel Race. So I entered it, and that was the initial reason. At the time, I was enjoying cycling again. I was getting a little bit disillusioned about professional cycling, and for me, it was also offered an escape to reattach with the purity of cycling and why I really love the sport. And as a lot of us, have loved it since we were kids, when we were just tackers, getting to mischief, discovering independence, which wasn't always it was fraught with danger, but that was what we loved about it, and that helped me sort of regenerate my love of the sport.
So tell us a bit about the Indy Pack. So it starts in Perth, and you're unassisted. So how does it all work?
Well, the Indy Pack, starts in Fremantle, actually, and it starts at the South Mole Lighthouse in Fremantle, and it's a 5,471 kilometre route across Australia to Sydney, to the Opera House. It's not the direct route that Sir Hubert Opperman rode. It's actually a route that once you get to Port Augusta, you head down south to Adelaide, then you go up across to Murray Bridge, Tailem Bend, and down along to the coast, down along to your way to Geelong, up through Melbourne, through the Dandenongs, Victorian Alps, the long way through the Victorian Alps, out through Backle Falls and out to Woolworth, Scott McGrory territory, and then back through the Kosciuszko National Park, Canberra, the Southern Highlands. Then you come into Sydney, and then you've got a sting in the tail where there's a 60-kilometre route along a bike path that heads out to Olympic Park, back through the north, across the bridge to the Opera House. Sounds simple, but trust me, it's not that simple.
So, of course, the first one ended up being quite a tragic event. So take us through a little bit of that absolutely tragic story.
Yeah, that was 2017, and that was the first Indy Pack, and that was the one that I entered. Mike Hall from England, he was killed on just south of Canberra. He was in second place at the time. Leading the race at the time was Christophe Algert from Belgium, and Mike was struck by a car in the early hours of the morning, and was killed almost instantly. But irrespective of that, at the time I arrived into Adelaide, and it was about 9:30 in the morning when I heard of his death. There was an ABC news report out of a cyclist in the Indy Pack having been killed. Obviously, that was a shock. I was just getting to the groove of the race. Actually, I was 2 weeks into it, and I'd gone through adapting from the highs and the lows, and I was looking forward to the second half of the event. And I tried to contact my wife Libby immediately, and obviously that was it was a hard call, and she was distressed, and I had no qualms about making the decision to stop there and go home. But almost as I got off the phone speaking to her, the race organisers had said the race was officially cancelled. Some people, about 20, still continued on. I mean, everyone responds differently to these situations. But yeah, that was an awful way for the Indy Pack to make its debut. It was awful either way. Mike Hall was killed. That was the tragedy of it all. But the event still continued the next year unofficially. I did it the next year in 2018, and I finished it. And it still continues to this day. It's the third edition, and this year it was a fourth edition, which stopped because of COVID, blocking the borders. And it's an event that doesn't need to be organised. Actually, it's an event that just runs itself. a group of like-minded people will just meet at the South Mole Island, the lighthouse, on the second or third weekend of March, and go for a long ride across Australia on a route that everybody knows.
So when you did finish the 2018 one, that would probably been the fittest you would have ever been. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I certainly probably wasn't the fittest I'd ever been. Funnily enough, I only lost half a kilo. So it's probably a measure of how much I ate along the way. And when I finished it in 2018, I didn't set out with a race mentality. I just rode it to ride it, to finish. And I wanted to cherish, the opportunity I had to do this event, which, as you said, was solo and unsupported. So you have to look after yourself, your own food, your own sleep, your own, you don't have a support crew, anything like that. So I wanted to finish it, the old cliche of unfinished business, but two, I wanted to show you could ride these events safely. I wanted to promote safe cycling and about responsibility and taking control of responsibility. The book that I was writing on it, which I'd been contracted before the first Indy Pack, I wanted to show, you can ride safely. I wanted to make aware of, you do that not just for your own safety, but for the concern of friends and families who are understandably very, there's a lot of anxiety that they feel in what is ostensibly can be seen as a selfish adventure. And I think I learned a lot of that from awareness during that first Indy Pack. So, my wife was very understanding in me being able to do it again, but I had to certainly respect her by putting in my own extra measures of safety measures on top of other ones that a lot of people had learnt. So, so that was, that was how I approached the second one. Funnily enough, I actually was going faster in the second one than I was in the first one when I tried to race it. So I don't know how, there's a lot you can read into that. It took me to get across the Nullarbor Plain. It took me 5 days on the second time. The first time it took me 7 days. So maybe, I don't know. But either way, I was going faster. I was enjoying it. And I made sure every night I had a couple of beers. I'd stay at the local pub in the local towns and try and learn a bit about town and the publican and the old, local football team that nearly won the grand final but just missed out. And I took time to stop to talk to people. And I really discovered it's a beautiful way to see a beautiful country, which it wasn't because of Indy Pack. I may not have ever seen so much more. And I think we underestimate what Australia really has to offer. We go from European vacations and go around the world or to America, but Australia is so diverse, and in the outback and the rural and regional areas, people are really, really good people out there. And I think, if I can recommend anybody to do something different, see Australia. And I suppose a lot more than I want to say.
Maybe not right across it on a bike. I got to tell you, Rube, I do love your books. You're a fantastic writer. You really put people in the situation, and all of your books on Tour de France and that have been wonderful. But The Overlanders is my favourite. I didn't know much about those absolutely amazing pioneers, as you touched on before, who, for all different reasons, were riding out in the places where no one had hardly ever been. To ride a bike there in those days was just amazing. But it really it touched me. I just loved the book. Yeah,
thanks, Iffy. Well, it was a book I put obviously I put a lot of heart and soul in it because I had to ride across Australia 1.5 times to get the content. I certainly, during both rides, I did a lot of the live Facebook posts, which a lot of people said, how did I remember all the detail? But actually the live Facebook posts doubled up as not just, keeping people to come along on the journey with me as I went, but it also helped as a visual notepad for me to go back. And I pledged to myself I would be honest with how I'm feeling at the time, and there were some moments in those Facebooks where I looked like a complete idiot, lack of bike mechanical skills and things like that. There were times I was in tears, there was times I was laughing, there was times where I was just soaking up the environment and just showing the camera to provide a portal for people to see something they may not have seen. And I was also very transparent about, as I said, the pressures of these events domestically, in my case, on my with my marriage and our marriage, I should say, and with Libby, and it brought to scope, I guess it was the old rabbit hole. I did think about, why am I doing these ultra distance events, and I thought I'd better throw a chapter in, which ended up being a rabbit hole of why do I do this, and And I started to figure out a lot of it had to do with my own issues with mental health, with self-esteem, lack of self-esteem issues, and which came from when I was a kid, and my issues with the eating disorder, bulimia, which I still struggle with today. So I think it was a very, it was more than a bike ride for me, and it was a discovery of not just Australia, and a discovery of myself. And it's certainly changed me. I think it's helped me become more comfortable with. No, it hasn't changed me. It's helped me become me, really, and be comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty moving statement, mate. But you've been, a long history in journalism, and we'll get back to the beginnings of all that shortly. But it's a pretty tough career, and at the moment, it seems to be journalists losing their jobs in the newspaper game in large numbers. What's your opinion on all of that, mate?
Yeah, look, it is sad. I mean, every day you're picking up, I suppose they pick up the newspaper. There's not much to pick up now because they're very thin. But every day you're reading in the media of jobs going, and that's happening in all industries. So it's not just journalism alone. It's the way the world is today. But from a media point of view, it is very much information out there driven through the internet. Obviously, it's driven through social media, and the power of social media. You can't deny it as much as you may try to ignore it. I did try to. I have gone through phases of thinking this, you can't. No, I've always respected it, but it's the power of social media is there, so you can't expect to be working in the media and not learn to work with it. But jobs do go. I think because there is so much information out there and so much content and valuable content from people blogging or people can make a direct can use social media and the internet as a direct way to disseminate their message without having to go through traditional media. That eliminates the jobs of many of mainstream media in particular. So that's sad, but you've had to learn how to deal with it and live with it. And I think it's an ever-changing beast. I think it's still changing faster and faster. So you can't get. I've learnt now you can't get bogged down in the lament of what was. One thing somebody told me, reminded me, was that I remember when I started journalism was when newspapers were, it was in the hot metal days. We had compositors down with the printers. I remember working at the old Sun News Pictorial, the Herald Sun in Melbourne, and you go to the printers would be down there churning away, just like this. You knew the edition was getting ready to come out, and those demarcation lines not cross over, otherwise, there'd be the strike and everything could be shut down. But they were really exciting, vibrant days, and the whole search pursuit of a story and the time you had to commit to building networks and contacts and trust and that went beyond just for me a professional as being a professional. That was a lot of values I got out of that, which has helped me outside of work. I'm very lucky I experienced those days. So rather than the lament of not having those days now, I think you've got to sometimes take stock of what you did have and appreciate that experience for what it was.
Yeah, different. Well, I actually started my apprenticeship as a compositor machinist. So I was one of those guys tapping away there, putting out your print, mate. But
I think you guys got before we did.
But it's funny how you say that, because a newspaper used to deliver news. It was a rush to get it out. And when people got that, they were actually reading news. Now, there's nothing that gets printed in the paper that people don't already know about because it's instantly out there. But I still love my newspaper, and I think they're the future, the good ones that tell the more inside news of a story, the information. That's what a newspaper is about now, having good writers who can then deliver all about the story, because it's all clickbait on the website. It's bang, bang, bang. It's all about with a newspaper being able to read more in depth.
Exactly, and I think one of the other things that in more recent changes, which is a big concern, I think, is the demise of regional papers too, because that the power of a regional paper in communities, particularly in the regional area, the country areas, that unites towns. That brings people together, and with those regional papers being cut by more regularly, those communities don't have those roots to hold on to, that communicative roots to hold on to. They have to rely on on a metropolitan daily, which cannot give the focus on a town or the region around a town that a regional paper can give. So that's probably my more recent sort of regret to see that happen. And I wish all those towns out there all the best. To hopefully they can find ways to help each other out communicatively rather than just having to rely on what is not existing now, the local paper.
Yeah, and the real shame of all that, of course, is that's only happened in the last few months. A lot of those community papers have gone in just the last few months, right when they probably needed it most of all with the COVID situation. So it's a real tragedy.
Exactly, mate. Exactly, 100%.
Now, back to cycling.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the revised UCI calendar? It's going to be, if it does happen, it's going to be a damn hectic couple of months for the bike riders.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit of don't want to be flippant. I think it's a bit of a crapshoot, really, by the UCI, just throwing all the dice, all the cards up in the air and see what lands and what doesn't land, I can't see all the races that they've put down being held. The permutations are massive. It only takes one person in one race to be tested positive for COVID. Doesn't matter whether they're a rider or staff member, then you think, what happens then? That team has to go into isolation, gets pulled from the race. And who's in what hotel? Well, they're in the same hotel as another team. What happens then? I cannot see the season ending without something like that happening. The other element is the strain on teams it's like they're trying to do a whole season in a couple of months. Teams are limited on how many riders they've got as it is. I can see teams like Sunweb, talking about having bubbles, and then moving around. And you can't deny the efforts that have been put in place to try and accommodate that. But we're seeing here in Australia how hard it is, where the situation is not as grievous as it is in Europe. And we're talking about sports, whether it's AFL, NRL, rugby union, or any sports. A lot of these sports are static sports where they're in the stadiums. Cycling is a moving events. So the permutations are even more so. I don't want to sound like a doomsayer, but and I really wish and hope it works, but I can't see how it's just going to go through smoothly like that. And the other element is how much pressure will be on riders to have to perform and just go back to back. I mean, there's pressure on them anyway, and I guess some of the teams will be divided up wisely as to manage their workloads. But you hope that this crammed season into a few months doesn't put extra demands on cyclists to race harder and harder, and not get their recovery. We're talking about riders' well-being, health issues, the other pathways that we've seen in history, how tired riders can lean towards doping to try and back up again, just finish races and things like this. We don't want to set a scene where that actually encourages, certainly doesn't encourage, but where riders could be tempted to go down that path because they feel they have to race day in, day out to fill one season in 2 months. I don't think you can expect that on riders. And I'd like to think the teams have accommodated that by perhaps choosing some part of their squads to just do a certain amount and then go into pre-season training for next year. So it comes down to management, but there's a lot of question marks, Iffy.
Yeah, I was talking to some of the guys at Mitchell and Scott over the last few days, and that's one of their big concerns, how they do manage that. And it's interesting talking with the different people over there as to whether they think the racing will get underway. I was reading all the Tour de France guidelines of how they're going to operate the Tour de France in this current situation. And the one thing they didn't seem to touch on is what will happen, as you just said, if there is a positive COVID test to one of the riders. That doesn't seem to have been addressed very well in the Tour de France pandemic guidelines.
No, and if you think you can have all of these teams in bubbles, you can have all the official entourage in a supposed bubble, but these bubbles are moving. They're going through towns. They're staying in different hotels every night. So there's different staff every night. There's different, and you're going through villages where people, are they going to have lockdowns of villages where villagers are not allowed to come out of their home while the tour goes through? That could happen. I don't know. It's just so vast, and I can understand why they want to have the tour, and I can understand why the French government will work closely with ASO, the organisers, to do all it can to have the tour. I personally wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I have two views. One, I'll be surprised if the tour is on, but two, if the tour is on, I don't believe it'll finish. You know, I just think something will happen to force a shutdown. I hope it doesn't happen if it does start, but primarily I hope it is not continued to compromise the health of not just the tour entourage, but, you know, France in Europe. I mean, how quickly does it spread so quickly? We know this in Australia. So why risk it?
Yes, and they're in a much worse situation than us over in France, Spain, Italy at the moment, and Britain. They've got their numbers are just soaring way above ours, and yet they're still talking about opening up things. So it's a strange situation we're in. So we're going to take a break, and when we return, it's all about the Tour de France and the man who's covered more than 30 of them.
Eyes on Bikes help grow small businesses. We are the world's #1 bike marketplace, where buyers and sellers are brought together in a place where a bike is never just a bike. Bike Exchange, where the world buys, sells, learns, and rides.
So before we get onto the tour, Roop, let's talk about your beginnings in journalism. So how did that all start?
I never really aspired to be a journalist. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, actually. My first job after I left school was in a pub, funnily enough. and I did that for about a year. It frustrated me, though, because I hated being in a pub, not being able to have a beer. Although I found a way around that, but that's another story. But and then I remember my mum, who was a journalist, funnily enough, she was kind of concerned about where I was going with my life, and I didn't go to university. I qualified for university. I was going to do an arts degree. I signed up, but then I deferred for 1 year, then 2 years. I never actually did it. So I ended up getting a job under my mum's encouragement. She dropped me off at the office of News Limited in Sydney in Surrey Hills for an opening as a copy boy. Copy boys and copy girls were basically gophers in those days, and you basically had to work on the editorial floor, getting things for editors, getting photos, getting copies, getting meals, getting phone books thrown at you for getting the wrong photos, the wrong meals, taking messages down to people like yourself, the compositors downstairs, and basically just doing all that. And every few months you'd get a test where you could, it was for a cadetship, and basically you did these tests, and over the time you'd done 3 tests, your average was worked out, and if you got in the top 5, you got a cadetship. And that's what happened with me. And a cadetship was pretty much like an apprenticeship. And it was a 3-year cadetship, which you did. You didn't have to go to university, but it was all on the job training. And you got moved around every few months to another section of the paper or to another paper altogether. So you had got a good across the board grounding of journalism. Then obviously you get to choose where you want to focus on. And for me, it was sport. And my first paper where I stayed full time in one section of sport was The Australian. And I was in the Sydney office, and then in 1984 I moved down to Melbourne for their Melbourne bureau for a year, and ended up living down in Melbourne for 4 years. So that's really how it started. And then that's when I fell in love with the bike.
And which took you, so then what took you to Europe? Because you were based in Europe for quite a while.
Yeah, it was after 1986. I came back from having competed in the Hawaii Ironman for the second time. I did it in 85 and 86. And I'd quit my job at the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, now the Herald Sun, to train full time for Hawaii. So I came back, and I guess I was in need of a job. And during that time, I met Phil Anderson, who, as you know, Iffy, and a lot of people, our listeners would know, was the first non-European to ever claim the yellow jersey in 81. So I had already been sort of enamored by his story, and through that, the story of European cycling. And I used to pick up this magazine, Winning Magazine, that here in Australia we'd receive 6 months late. So you get the Tour de France special in December and find out about the Tour de France. But it was still great. You read it, you looked at the pictures, fabulous pictures of Graham Watson, and stories written by John Wilcoxon, who's then, this is all pre-internet and we didn't have the tour on TV or anything. The videos were 6 months late too. So John's writing would describe how these slight cross westerlies would blow across the plains through the lily field, not the lily fields, through the sunflowers, and suddenly a drop of sweat would fall off Bernardino's nose, and like all this, but you actually used to feel like you were living and breathing it. Anyway, so I wrote to John as I came back from the States, and I met John at the Coors Classic, and obviously in '86 they were having the World Championships there in Colorado Springs. So I wrote to John explaining how I would love to come over to Europe. I'd love to write. I was going to write a book on Phil Anderson, and I'd love to come over. Thought there'd be any work. And John, little did I know, John was leaving Winning Magazine, and said they need an editor. So I just made the right call at the right time, and I got a one-way ticket to go over there and edit Winning UK, the UK edition, which was published in Brussels, and that's how it all unfolded, really. And I was going to be a one-year working holiday, and it became, I didn't stay at Winning, obviously, but it was a one-year working holiday. I ended up living there in Belgium for 4 years, and then 5 years in France until I came back in early '96. And but it was a great way to see not just Europe, but it was a great way to see, I went to Colombia, to Japan, to cycling. I used to even get to come back to Australia for the old Commonwealth Bank Classic. I never got to the Sun Tour though, Iffy. We've got to sort that out one day.
Or the Bay Classic, even more. The Bay Classic.
I have got there once. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, what was that crazy Belgian's name who owned Winning Magazine?
Jean-Claude Garreau.
Jean-Claude Garreau.
Yeah,
that's right. I remember him.
Yeah,
because I actually, for a year or so there, did an Australian edition with him, and he used to write some of the stuff for that, and we had a bit of fun because it was a beautiful magazine. I mean, it was classy, beautiful photography, and all of that. And as you say, you're based in London. I think you shared a flat for a while with. There we go. Just. Perfect. Magazine.
We built this morning.
Exactly. You shared a flat in London with Darren McQuaid, who's now chairman of Mitchell and Scott.
Yes. I lived with the chairman. His sister Anne McQuaid was the manager of Winning UK, and she was my boss. And the Winning UK office in London was in East Sheen. And originally I was going to live in London and then go and take the ferry across all the time to Belgium, to Brussels to edit the magazine. And so for the first 6 months, Tony Doyle, famous 6-day cyclist, who used to, as you know, Iffy, you would have raced against him or with him, I'm sure, and had some great partner with the great Danny Clark, and there's a lot of stories there. Anyway. He rented me and Dara his house in Sunbury-on-Thames, and it was never quite. It used to have a beautiful rose garden at the back and nice little sort of English look about it. Obviously, it's in England, but English by the time an Aussie and an Irishman had lived there for 6 months. Put it that way.
Well, we know Dara's a good mate of mine as well, as you know, and the three of us have had some fun times together over the years, and Tour de France and Giro and etc. So your first Tour de France, when was that?
1987, and because that was the year I moved over to left Australia, early '87, and it was that was on my bucket list, to follow the Tour de France one time, and here I was with Winning Magazine, getting the chance to work on, to cover the tour, and that was the year Stephen Roach won it, and funnily enough, Roach, part of Winning Magazine, Roach agreed to do a daily diary for us, and again, that was back in an earlier day. There was no agent to deal with. There was no money spoken of. It was just an agreement, shake of the hand, and we didn't know how we were going to do it. Let's try and do it. It was before teams had buses and all that sort of stuff. I've got pictures of me sitting there in a gutter interviewing Stephen Roach, and he ended up winning the Tour de France. So that was a fortuitous start, I have to say, in my Tour de France reporting days. But it was every bit the adventure that I thought it would be, plus some more. Things went right, things went wrong, and usually things that you didn't expect would go wrong. But it really was. It was a true adventure for me, and lived up to every expectation.
I remember '91 was the first tour that I did with Simon Townley, who was the sports editor of the Herald, or the Sun as it was at the time, and just the two of us. And of course, we bumped into you on many occasions. I came back in, I think, '98, and I've done them all since. And this is July, and normally you and I would be at the tour. So we're both first July back in Australia for a long time.
Yeah, right now we'd be talking about our Monday lunch in Paris, wouldn't we?
Yes, well,
we're
dreaming.
Close to it.
Yeah. So just take me through some of those early tours. I mean, not many Australians riding. I think 4 or 5 maximum back in those days.
Yeah. There was basically like a sort of a turnaround of 4 or 5 riders each year. Phil Anderson was getting towards the back end of his career, even though he did win he jagged a stage in '91. But he was getting towards the end of his career. Alan Piper was there. Stephen Hodge, Neil Stevens, Scotty Sunderland, Michael Wilson. He was around. He wasn't at the Tour de France, but he was around on the pro scene at the time, and he was a fabulous cyclist, Michael Wilson. He and a fabulous person too. And he was a true gentleman. He used to, he always offered a smile, and whenever he saw us at dinner, he'd often give us a suggestion for a good wine as well. Myself and Graham Watson, and so there was a nice sort of band of riders of varying skills. Obviously, all of them excellent cyclists, because they were on these wasn't world tour then, but they were on these top ranked pro teams, and they had different skills and different personalities, and in some ways you felt you were a part of. I mean, I was never a part of their group, but it was just I guess I was an extension of this band of Aussies going over there, and you would have experienced that in your days if you're riding over there. You sort of do draw to each other, and you have different experiences, and but you also feed off each other's experiences when you hear of. Because then English wasn't spoken as widely as it is now. I remember having my first interview with Jean-Marie Leblanc, the race director, and the first thing he said was in French. He said, "Of course, you speak French. That's the language of cycling," And fortunately, I did, but not as. Fortunately, I learned it a lot better too. It was their world, their thinking, and you just had to adapt to it. But that was, you were naive if you weren't going to expect otherwise when you went over there.
So so how tough was it when you're building a friendship with riders and staff, and then you have to ride the tough story, which has a bit of a go at them? How did that work?
That was pretty hard, and you know me, Iffy, and it's probably one of my journalistic strengths. It's no secret I don't like conflict, and you've got to embrace conflict to be ready for it, and it's certainly an area of, if I look back on my career, there's probably areas where perhaps I should have or could have embraced the essence of conflict a bit better rather than taking a cautious approach. But I also did generally like to think that, you can be, there's a certain degree of objectivity as well. But so look, with at that time, I mean, if you wrote a story and they didn't like it, I guess they'd just bring you up and tell you. That was basically it then, because that was the line of communication. Or they saw you at the next race and say, "Hey mate, didn't like what you wrote the other day." You say, "Oh, why?" And so I used to find the best way was to talk about it, talk it out. I remember Sean Kelly once having a go at me at the start of a Tour de France, and we were in Lyon, and he said, I went up to him after stage one. It was one of those. He was on PDM, and I think they missed the break on stage one, and they were the only big team that missed the break. And he said to me in his Irish accent, he said, obviously Irish accent, he's Irish. He said, I'm not going to, and he was still recovering. So I'm not talking to you until you tell me, admit you were wrong with what you wrote last year after stage one. I'm going, I can't remember what I wrote after stage one. And he went, And I said, well, I can't even remember what I wrote, but he could. Obviously, he's like an elephant with detail. And he obviously didn't forget, he obviously was going to take issue with me. And I said, look, how about we look at it this way? You let me go and have a look tonight, and if I'm wrong, I'll admit it to you, and then you can talk to me. Then you'll agree to talk to me. So I thought, I might play with it. Don't get all defensive. Just say, hey, he's obviously. I went back, and I thought I was dead set right. I thought, I've got Kelly. I thought, how stupid is that? Never think you've got Kelly. and I checked, and I was wrong. And I walked back. He knew in my face that I was wrong. But I knew that I was wrong. But that was, that you do that direct front up. Someone doesn't like what you wrote, they would confront you with it. You can discuss it. I'll try and discuss it. Then I found out if I was wrong, just admit I was wrong. Made a mistake, and I'll get it right next time.
I remember organising a party after one Tour de France, one that Cadel didn't have a real good tour, if I remember rightly. But at the after party on the Sunday night, and everyone was having a good time. And Cadel walked in, a couple of his mates, and I had a spot for him to sit. And he said, I'm not sitting there. Why? He said, I'm not sitting there next to Rupert or Ron Reed. I said, why?
Yeah.
And you'd both written something that had been a bit how to go at him. And he, it took him a while to get over that. Wouldn't sit there.
Yeah. Well, you fast forward the dateline a bit. This is where that was during, I think it's 2000 and would have been 2008 or possibly 2009. Cadel, he was he could be a challenging personality to work with, at his times, and I think at that time we'd written a story about the Lotto team boss saying that Cadel could still stay with the team, but he wouldn't be their number one. He wouldn't be sole leader, and obviously I think Cadel didn't appreciate that story, but that's what the team boss said, and the team boss is the one who pays the bills. It was a story. Cadel, he'd missed out on 2008. It's obviously missed out narrowly in 2007 by 23 seconds. 2008, he missed out by 58 seconds. So then 2009, I think it started to blow out a bit, and there were people questioning whether Cadel would be able to win the Tour or not. I think most people agreed he had the physical capabilities, but I think the one element that was then his perceived area where his rivals could get at him was probably his psychological strength. He was tough as nails. I'm not saying he wasn't tough, but being able to. I think he absorbed too much of the exterior noise without having to worry about it. And I think, in respect, and I got so much respect for Cadel, and to his credit, we forged a very good relationship after those tough years. Sometimes you've got to bottom out to forge a strength of understanding between two people. And we did speak about understanding each other better, and certainly, I guess you could say like a good bottle of red, mate. You don't want to open it too early, it tastes a bit bitter. But if you open it at the right time, it tastes great, as it did in 2011 when he won the Tour de France. There you go.
We'll go there in a minute. I can remember one of those two, around about that 2008, 2009 time. I was writing for the Geelong Addy, which is also Cadel's home paper. And I went up to get a grab with him. This is the day when they were doing the official stuff the day before the race. And I walked up with the thing. He said, John, I reckon if I said something was black, you'd say it was white. I said, what are you talking about? And something I'd written in the preview, he reckons he didn't say. Well, that's because he probably didn't. And I said, oh, so then he stormed off. And I think, 3 weeks to go. And I'm writing for the Geelong Addy. He's not talking to me. So the next day I said to him at the start, listen, mate, I will only write exactly what you say for the next 3 weeks. He said, I believe that when I read it. But then he was fine after that. So he'd had his go, and we settled down.
I also found a way that, obviously, Cadel was understandably, the time for a cyclist, particularly in the more modern tours, and I put Cadel in the more modern tours, time goes so fast in a tour day. And you think that's 23 or whatever days, their most calmest time is possibly in the race rather than outside it. and 1 minute becomes 2, becomes 5, and they have to answer a lot of the same. It's their job. They answer a lot of the same questions. So I can understand the frustration when they hear or interpret something as being, as they say, silly or stupid. But like a cyclist, not every pedal stroke a cyclist makes is the wisest best pedal stroke either. You know, I mean, I had that with Stephen Roach once. I got upset with him once where he shook me on the head and said, "Oh, you're a silly idiot, aren't you, Rupert? Like I was some sort of toy." And I got really peed off to the point I wrote him a letter saying that not every kilometre you ride is the best or wisest one either, mate. You know, I'm just doing my job. I ask 100 questions in a day, and not all of them are going to be right. You know, to sound the wisest question. But that was the game point. Deal with it. Just confront them and deal with it. And he dealt with me. Oh, we spoke the next day, and we laughed about it later. You know, we didn't necessarily laugh about it later, but he has his way of I think appreciating in time when he steps away from things. You know, I mean the fact that you had run-ins with Cadel, and then you still have good relationships with him. I did. I crossed swords with him too, but. Crossing swords, as I said, helps you better understand the person you're dealing with too. Because if you have a conflict with someone, you're going to walk away and think about where they're coming from. And if you're going to be fair, at least try and understand where they're coming from. And then you get a better feel for how they're thinking, and then how you can best work with them.
So let's take a step back to the Lance years. So 1999, with Lance, really comes back from all these. So, what are your memories of that tour?
99. Well, my memories of that tour. Look, it's easy to say in hindsight what that tour meant. The guy was in the gear. But if you're talking about taking back my mind and what I thought at the time, obviously it was this, I guess even the word unbelievable, you can read into a different context now, but at the time it was this unbelievable fairy tale come back from near fatal cancer. Obviously immediately there were suspicions of doping, and that became the narrative for the rest of his career, and probably still will be the narrative of the rest of his life and of cycling's that chapter in cycling, and not just him and doping, but cycling and doping, and everybody who worked in that era, So, but certainly it was a whirlwind of a frenzious sort of definitely tour. It could not be anything but, coming after. 98, and it was it was quite it was a whirlwind, a bit of a blur, because so much happened every day that you just thought, well, this guy, he's going to keep the jersey, and he did at the end, and that also transformed, I guess American cycling obviously had hinged on the success of Greg LeMond and his 3 tour wins, and his story alone was a remarkable story. Talking about coming back from death, Greg LeMond, who I followed his tours in 88, 89, and 90, and 90, 91. Also transfer into the Miguel Indurain era. I mean, Greg LeMond's story was sensational in itself, and then for another country to have a story up another level of remarkable comeback from near fatal circumstances.
Because Greg had been shot by his brother-in-law while out turkey shooting. He thought he was a turkey.
Well, that was one of my first, like 87, in the spring of 87. I just joined, winning that year, and I was actually in the Brussels office in April when the report came through that his brother-in-law shot him in a turkey hunting, and it wasn't, he was near death. He was, managed to get him out into a hospital. He was near death with all the pellets in him, and obviously he came back, and then he had that remarkable tour win in '89 where he beat Laurent Fignon in the last time trial in the Champs-Élysées. I mean, how would you ever think something more dramatic and circumstantial from, you know, coming back from near death could you have than that? And then, well, Lance Armstrong came along.
I'll top that.
Yeah.
So it did become a really strange time with the whole Lance. As we talked about, there were rumours always around Lance. Was this amazing story a story just too good to be true? Well, it turns out it was.
And that whole Lance Armstrong era, of the first year before he, up until I guess his first retirement, you know, I did write in my book What a Ride, which was a story of Aussies in the Tour de France and trying to, you know, me following them that time. And I mean, when Armstrong did retire after his seventh not win, I did write in the book how that whole Lance Armstrong era was a bitter era. It was a bitter era of obviously in hindsight because of the doping that was proven, but also with the divisiveness within groups. Obviously, he was a great manipulator of people, of organisations, of so many parts. It was from the press room to the stage starting area, from teams to everywhere. People were split. Friendships were forged. Friendships were challenged, and it was not a nice, enjoyable era. Even then, and back when I wrote this book in 2008, I wrote it was not an enjoyable era. That I was glad it was gone, or so I thought it was gone. But it was still going to obviously become more apparent as to how bitter it was. And anyway, that's
Yeah, so Lance, you said the word before. He was the ultimate manipulator. He manipulated situations so that it would be awkward for people to question him all the time. And those people who did question him all the time never got any time with him, which created an incident with David Walsh, who was really onto the anti-Lance campaign, and they become quite bitter rivals, to the stage where he really took umbrage with anything that David said. And David was a regular traveller with you and your little group in the car. So just tell us about that incident where you were told, or not you personally, but your group were told David Walsh wouldn't be travelling with you, or you would get no interviews.
Yeah, that was 2004 Tour de France start in Liège, and there's been different iterations of what happened there, and there's been the Hollywood movie iteration, there's been the social media iteration, and one thing I can say, I have like David and I are friends now, and we've discussed this. Also, the other thing I'd just like to say is, with the view to the handful of say journalists who did pursue the Armstrong doping story vigilantly, guys like Pierre Ballester, Paul Kimmage, I've been in contact with them, and I think they were, amongst many others outside of the media. I mean, you can talk of a long list. Betsy Andreu and Frank Andreu. There's a long list of people who were I'd say, whether they were victims or survivors, but either way they were unfairly Armstrong was really bad to them. Okay, now the journalists who were pursuing the story, they were doing their job. I mean, I do believe that in the whole system that allowed Armstrong to develop the power base that he did, where he could become the manipulator, where he could become the person the manipulator, the person, the puppeteer, the whole system that was built around him was complicit in allowing him to develop that power. So from a media point of view, the media was complicit as well, including myself, because I think we all have a responsibility in how a situation unfolds. I wrote that in 2012. Piece I wrote for the Sydney Morning Herald. I wrote two pieces saying that I always took a cautious stand. I still wrote about the doping stories, but I wasn't pursuing the doping stories as per Walsh or Kimmage, much to their credit and to their courage, I should say. But I did say that if my cautiousness was proven to be wrong, I'll definitely fall on my sword and say I was wrong. Well, I knew what was going to happen, that I would be falling on my sword, because I wrote a piece saying I have to raise my hand for accountability into how I was a part of a system that allowed Armstrong to develop such a power base. His doping was, I'll come back to your answer about the car incident, but it's important to clarify that, because his doping was wrong, and he was one of, like, a large part of the peloton was doping. We all know that now. But how he used his power and authority and managed to manipulate such to actually get it all there. That was wrong. But what was wrong was the system allowing him to get all that power. So going, and I could talk all day about this, but and I've said, and I don't really like talking about it, to be fair, because I'm happy to talk to you guys. You've got a platform which is open, and I've often said to people, I'd be quite willing to talk to people. I said it at dinners, and I was happy to talk to people about it. I don't like to talk about it on TV because it becomes like a 30-second grab. Same thing on social media, because it becomes sort of grabs, but I've always been open for people to contact me and talk to me privately about it, or in a public forum where I get a chance to speak. To go back to 2004, the situation at the time there in Liège, I was in the News car. I was working for News Limited. I was paying 1/4 of the car. So David Walsh was paying 1/4 of the car, and it was the Velo News accredited car. It was known in the lead up to the tour. I think Velo News were getting pressured about their access to Armstrong, etc., or possibly their advertising revenue, depending on how their position was with Armstrong. With a view to myself, I was already at the time, I was on Armstrong's blacklist, because in 2003 I was put onto the blacklist for the second time because of my friendship with David Walsh. I went into that tour obviously realising there was, they were trying to deal with David as to what he'll be doing or not. I'd mentally taken a view to one of the last messages Armstrong, which I took as a condescending thing, really, where he said, Rupert, you just go and write about your Aussies. So that was as he put me on the blacklist. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write about the Aussies. And it didn't actually worry me in 2004 about being on his blacklist, because I thought, what I have to worry about chasing him around? And the Aussies were starting to do very well. Obviously, Stuart O'Grady, Robbie McEwen, he was doing pretty well with his green jersey, wasn't he? And so if anything, I was probably ambivalent when I heard at the start of the tour that told, oh, look, we've spoken to David and we both agreed that it's best he doesn't come with us. I went, oh, well, what? Okay. So something was happening with that. I had my place in the car. After about 10 days, I learnt what had actually happened, and that because I didn't see David much for the next 10 days. And when I did realise what had happened, that he'd been told that we all thought he shouldn't be in the car, I was kind of pretty annoyed, but also I was also annoyed with myself. I probably should have asked more detail. I shouldn't have been so ambivalent at the start about David not being in the car. I should have asked more about it, because I realised how his take on it. So I went and apologised to David, and he's recognised that since. So that's what happened with the car, but obviously and understandably, it's become a talking point, because it was a point in reference to a lot of David's writings, because it highlighted the way the systems of how it happened. It became obviously an interesting scene and an important scene in the movie that was there. So I understand people's interest in it. And it wasn't I didn't enjoy that tour. I remember ringing home, saying, I'm just not enjoying the tour. This is awful. It was, to that point where, as I said, after 2005, when Armstrong retired, I was so happy at the time, thinking that would be the end of it. So I might not actually. It's a long answer, isn't it? Sorry about that. But
no, that's fine. It's fine. Look, it was a terrible time in our sport. Lance, he won't be forgiven not for taking the drugs because that was a bad time for drugs in our sport, but he won't be forgiven because of his the way his aggressive way he handled and bullied people. That's what that's what he won't be forgiven for. But let's move away from Lance, because we then had the terrible the next year in 2000 and what was it, 2006, Floyd Landis. What were your thoughts for the sport then when Floyd came out and found positive?
Oh, look, again, I think by the time Landis had won the tour, I think the suspicions were already there. I mean, that's when he got that yellow jersey back with that unbelievable ride to get the jersey back. It certainly smelled, you know. I remember I left after that year's tour, and I remember I heard about the positive test. I was in Singapore in transit on the way home, and so it really wasn't that surprising. But I remember thinking at the start of that year's tour, maybe we'll see, like clean sheets on a bed, nice soft pillows. How wrong was that, you know? And then really you realise, well, you know, it hasn't changed. And even when you look at now what we know in hindsight, benefit hindsight again of the status of doping, maybe just reinforces the fact, obviously it wasn't just Armstrong who was the perpetrator. It was other riders, and again, it wasn't just other riders. It was the system and the sport. It was far beyond just one or two riders. It was the system. Yeah. But so things really hadn't changed. The Renaissance tour was so not the Renaissance tour.
No, but look, I really do. The best thing that happened in cycling was that Lance did make his comeback and then finally got exposed, because without that cathartic situation, the sport mightn't have changed. And it's had this amazing turnaround where youngsters now are coming into the sport really believing they can win the Tour de France clean. And our Cadel's had a lot to do with that. So let's talk about the emergence of Cadel, because that was not just something great for Australian cycling, but great for world cycling.
Yeah, look, I think I remember Cadel. I think it was 2005. I think it was the stage finish in Mons where he was in a break with Armstrong, and I remember that's right. He was in a break, and it's at the airstrip at Mons, at the top of the hill there. There's a 3-kilometre climb, and you're on the airstrip, and then Cadel suddenly sprinted because he was there with. I think it was, he beat Armstrong for 11th place, and the look on Armstrong's face was like, "What's this?" And I think he expressed his view in Armstrong way-esque language. And Hendrik Redant was Cadel's director sportif then, and he said he really likes that. He loves, that someone's willing to take it to Armstrong. I'm also sure Armstrong saw that as a show of strength or whatever, but that was just Armstrong's, bullish. But to me, it was a signifying that, hey, Cadel's not, he's willing to take on something. He sees, that's what he said. I see a white line, and the fact that he was willing to take on Armstrong and that sprint that meant nothing. Still, I think there's a little spark that showed that, well, as this show, that here we've got someone who's going to come up, and that was Cadel's first tour. I think he got 8th and I thought, for me, I remember thinking, wow, this is great. This is a fresh story to follow, the narrative to follow, and obviously that became a narrative of highs and lows and varying explosive emotions as well in its own way. So. But that was even a lot of the explosiveness of emotions and relations with Cadel in those years. At least they were based on sporting sort of premises, and you know what I mean. It was it's a high tense atmosphere at those stage finishes, particularly on the mountains. Everyone's trying to get stuff, and this is even then it was way before the advent of social media and the internet's reach of power that it has now. It was then a more traditional media sort of based event, where it was more traditional than what it is now. Anyway,
I remember we watched Cadel, finish second twice, total of less than a minute, and we just thought, is that his opportunity gone? I thought his first time he ran second to Contador, he was probably robbed in that the Dane Rasmussen was rubbed out well into the race, and obviously he would have been on some super fuel. He was gone, but he had taken a lot of time out of Cadel. Look, him racing Contador, and Cadel just lost a lot of extra time because of Rasmussen, a lot more than what he lost that tour by, I felt.
Yeah, so you're saying that the energy he expended to try and account for Rasmussen could have cost him the energy that he would have needed and would have had to make that 23 seconds on Contador.
Yeah, I agree.
Or win the tour anyway. Yeah, I think you can make the mathematical assumption on that, and one of Cadel's shows of strength, I think, he obviously, he had to move on from that too. And again, he had to do it again, and after losing the tour in 2008 to Carlos Sastre, that time trial where everybody thought Cadel's a shoe-in to win this, and I remember that morning, sorry if I've gone ahead to 2008, but I remember that paper saying I had a news list of 9 stories to write, and I had to get most of them written before time trial started just to make the deadline. And I'd written 5 of them with 4 to go. And obviously it didn't go the way that everyone thought. Remember, even there was polls in the papers, and the guy Eddie Merckx was saying, yes, Cadel Evans win the tour, and it's like, wow. So I've written all the historical pieces, which fortunately I kept copies of. I was able to use them 4 years later when you did need it. So, but it was exciting times. But then I felt depressed by the time when Cadel suddenly just didn't have the right, things went wrong on that time trial, and Sastre won the tour, and I felt deflated. But I was just a journalist. I had a job. I just had to go on to the next job. Evans has had to sort of live with these setbacks, including other setbacks, like when he didn't miss out on the Vuelta win and Vuelta España win. So he's lived with all this. Yeah, a number of times he could have just been crestfallen and surrendered. But I think the toughness of Cadel is even you and I know it and we speak about it, but he's the one who really knows how tough that resolve he's got, and I don't think people ever probably totally understand how tough he is.
It all changed, I reckon, in 2010 when he won the world title. That was a sort of big change in Cadel's way of thinking. I feel
because he almost reaffirmed his belief that that winning feeling and the way he won, and also the way that he had to assert himself within the hierarchy of the Australian team. I mean, he only had one way to win. He had to win it that way. Just bang, go.
Wow, what a ride! So now we move to the big one, 2011. What a race it was, and they had some highlights on the telly last night of those stages. When you think about those 2 days around the Galibier, it was the stage where Andy Schleck got away, and he had to chase, and you thought this is almost gone. And then the next day coming over the Galibier the other way, where he had those bike problems, we never really found out exactly what it was. We were stopping on the side of the road, thought, oh no, it's gone again.
Yeah. Was that when Mockowitz gave him a push as well? Did Jim Mockowitz and Mockowitz landed in the gutter? But when I remember that, I thought, oh, this is just not going to. It's meant to be. Fate's going to cruel us, when that happened. But Cadel was, when you look back on that tour, I mean, Cadel was as calm as I've ever seen Cadel, not just for one day, but for 3 weeks. At the same time, he's so assertive in what he wants. I think that stage one, he got he won a 1 second time bonus on stage one. I remember there thinking, And I did think it at the time. I'm not just saying because he was tour in the end, but I remember there thinking, this is a different Cadel. He's going out for this. He's going out for something. He never said, one thing about Cadel, he's never said, he come out and said, I want to win the Tour de France. He just said, I want to do the very best I can, and I want to have the best possible situation, a fair situation, I can find out how good I can be. Obviously, he wanted to win the Tour de France. There, he got that time bonus. And there, the BMC team, who weren't gifted with climbers, but they used their strengths to protect Cadel in those things, in that situation, rough and tumble stages over classic style stages. Then Cadel gets a couple more time bonus, and then he wins the stage finish over Contador in Britannia. You think, Jesus, I suppose that means golly gosh, I'm going to win this, and he was ready for it. He was chasing that, and each day passed, he got stronger in his confidence, and his team got that belief. I remember talking to George Hincapie, because he was saying how they had to basically corral Cadel, ride around it, and Hincapie told me how to tell the younger riders, all the peloton's going to pick on you guys because you're the younger guys, because they weren't going to come up to those guys, like Hincapie, because they were seasoned pros. They were going to try and bully them out to try and get, break the wall to get in close to Cadel to crawl, just to upset him. But they rode around him like a protective unit of, secret service around the president of the United States, and you could see that belief. And the more that Cadel saw, for once in his life, he had a team rock solid, committed to him. And as a bike rider, if that 1% between being a domestic and riding for your leader, or being a domestic and believing in your leader, there's a big difference. You do it for the paycheck, or you do it for the heart and soul. And these guys were doing it because they believed Cadel could win the Tour, and Cadel fed off that. I reckon he really did feed off it, and I was happy for him to finally have that belief in his team, because so many other times he never had belief in his teammates, and almost the times it sounded bitter. And here he didn't have to say anything. He responded by riding as he did at the back end of the Tour in those mountain stages, almost in respect for the work that they did to get him there. It was fabulous, mate. It was just a fabulous.
It was, and I remember. So after the penultimate stage time trial, which he just rode brilliantly to get the yellow jersey, and the press conference after stage conference was in there at the Grenoble bike track there, and you and I happened to be sitting together right in the front row. Everyone's waiting for Cadel, so the place is packed. Remembering everyone's got to drive more than 5 hours up to Paris, so a lot of people would normally go, but they all waited around. Cadel took ages to get there, probably an hour, because he had not just the presentations, but doping control, all of those things. So he finally walks in, and the whole press centre just stood up and applauded, something I'd never seen in all the tours that I'd been on. And it was, I believe, not just applauding the winner of that Tour de France, but what they all believed was a clean winner of the Tour de France. That was the, and I remember you and I both suffering with a bit of hay fever at that time. It was pretty special.
I had to pass you the tissue box, didn't I?
You did.
No, it was a special moment. I think there was and there was nothing. It was spontaneous. I mean, usually, you may see people. I mean, I'm not a big believer that press rooms should applaud, because and I think particularly after at that particular time, I just sort of didn't expect anybody to applaud, but it was a spontaneous thing that people were generally happy, and I couldn't really remember the last time I'd seen a press room happy, and from all different nationalities, and that was great to see as well. It reminded me of, where sport can be, we can get so caught up in the seriousness of sport. Sure, professional sport's got a lot of money in it. There's a lot of issues, in cycling was going through a lot of controversy and scandal. So there's every reason for people not to be seen to be happy, but bang, it's just like a candlelight being, set alight. And there was that glow of happiness that afternoon, and people, as you said, People didn't rush off to get to Paris. People were enjoying writing their stories of a guy called Cadel, you know.
And everyone thought exactly. He had the biggest grin on his face. I remember as he walked around to his seat and the podium in front of us. I leaned over just to put my tape recorder in front. He just said, "Oh, good day, Iffy. How are you, mate?" Like he just ridden around the park or something, not just grabbed about to win the Tour de France. It's pretty amazing. And I remember I was standing with you on the last day when he had finally won it. We're standing there when Tina Arena got up, which was an amazing moment how she did that, and just sang the national anthem. And that was another where I had to hand you the tissue box.
No, never. I was too hard on the soul by then. You know, it was a fabulous moment, and that was actually the first time that people, before they just get the old record out to play the national anthem, and here you had somebody singing it, and it actually added to it. It was a beautiful gesture by her, but it was also quite a spontaneous gesture by her, to put the call in to ask if she could do it, and I think it was a nice change of pace to those, particularly after the Armstrong sort of, messages to the civics out there and all that sort of stuff, where it almost became painful did become painful to listen to hear that. And then he had someone singing a national anthem beautifully, rather than just an old record. It was and there you had that summer glow over the Arc de Triomphe, and even then security wasn't like it is now. It was still very much a time where, like a lot of the issues of, with security issues, that it makes things a lot more tense at that finish line now than what they were then. It wasn't that long ago, but it seems a long time ago. We were able to enjoy those moments. No?
Yeah, pretty special. So we just to touch on, look, we've touched on all those tours, but last year's tour, I thought was one of the best of all time. I thought Cadel's was one of the greatest, but last year's tour, just every stage was just amazing. I just loved it. Alaphilippe, his whole journey, Richmond Scott winning 4 stages, Caleb, his 3 beautiful stages, but just the bike race itself, I thought it really stepped up.
Yeah, I thought it was a race of spontaneity. Again, that word spontaneity, but it was. Obviously Alaphilippe was the one who I think really ignited it. But as you said, other teams delivered, other riders delivered. Caleb Ewan's stage with Paris, that was fabulous, not just to get 3 stages, but that to win on Paris it's the stage to win for any sprinter. And I think even the dramatic finale to it, people couldn't say, "Oh, that was a shame the stages were cancelled," but that was Mother Nature, And I thought it's very easy these days, it's very easy these days to criticise organisers, and like organising a race and everything like that. But when things go catastrophically as wrong as they did in the Tour last year due to Mother Nature, which is an unstoppable beast, how ASO responded by cancelling, the next stage, the last mountain stage, as it did. Hats off to them for how they handled it and how swiftly they were able to contain it. Obviously, most of the race was going up the mountain, but you had the breakaway, with Yates in it, and they're hurtling down the mountain, with Bernal, to get the stage win and secure the GC. And suddenly the guy on a motorbike comes up and says, "Stage is over." Like, because they hadn't stopped them then. There was that landfall. I mean, quite possibly saved their life,
Yeah.
And it was a brilliant coordination of not just ASO decision making, but how you use the resources you've got from policing to staff and to everybody understanding and cooperating. And I think that was a success for the Tour, how they handled that, because disasters can only go one way or can only go 2 ways. Disasters are reverted or they're tragic. And And anyway, it was a fabulous tour, you know, and I was thrilled to have been there.
Rup, it's been fantastic to have this chat. Longest chat we've had in quite a while, actually. You've had it's been an unbelievable journey, and I know it's far from over. Unfortunately, we won't be able to host our Tour de France after party in about a week or so. We'll have to save that for next year, but I'm sure we'll catch up for a rosé very soon.
Anyway, no, that'd be great if you'd love to. But thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody who's listened. And any of the stuff, if I can just add, any of the stuff that we've spoken about, you know, any of the issues, as I said, I'm always happy to talk about them. If people want to ask me, just need to have the platform where I can get time and space to give the best answers I can, rather than willy-nilly short grabs.
Thanks, Rup. Fantastic, mate.
Thanks, mate. See you, mate.